Hello, everyone. My name is Dana Duffy, and I am the program coordinator here at the Monroe County Public Library. And we're very pleased to have the Bloomington Storytellers Guild here again for Wintertelling. This has been a tradition for, I believe, 18 years. Is that right? Yeah, so it's really nice to have them back. Just a couple of things. Behind me and behind the auditorium, if you go out here and you make a left, if you go down the hallway, that's where the bathrooms are. And there's also a water fountain there, too, if you need it. And then when the program is over, I know everybody wants to stand around and linger and talk, but we do have to have everybody out of the building here basically around 8:45 or so, because we have some staff that will need to go home. So, but we really appreciate that you guys have come, and welcome to the library and welcome to the show.
My name is Patty Callison, and I am the coordinator of Wintertelling. Before I forget, there is a legal pad. You all know what this is. This is a legal pad. If you are not already on our list to be notified of upcoming events, please put your email on this pad. It's going to be right out there in the hallway. So. Good audience. Welcome to, as Dana said, Jenny and I have been going back through records of the Bloomington Storytellers Guild because this year, when we tell it Ghost Stories in the Park, correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will, it will be our 50th year. And so we're sort of celebrating, and so we also went back and we've been through records, we've been through ledgers and all kinds of things to determine how, what about Wintertelling? How long have we been doing that? And although we have been at the library doing Wintertelling, as Dana said, for 18 years, however, we started telling first at the Unitarian Universalist Church, then at Unity Church, then we were at the Waldron. We've been several places doing our program, Wintertelling, since 1994. And some of you weren't even born then. So we're pleased to have you here with us tonight for Wintertelling and to help us celebrate in a small way the durability, the perseverance, the joy of stories. And I'm going to start things off with a story, and I was, we all go through this. Well, what shall I tell for Wintertelling? Oh, how long ago was it that I told you that? Coming up with a story. Well, I'm here to tell you that I thought of my story while watching Jimmy Carter's funeral. Why? You'll find out. Huge waves came crashing down on the boat, crashing and listing the boat back and forth and back and forth. "Man the pumps," the captain said. The men were scurrying around, bailing out the bottom of the boat. I guess you would call it a ship. Don't correct me on that. They were bailing out the ship, and down below, the men were trying to get the water out of the bottom of the ship. But it kept coming in and coming in. Now, there was one callous, rogue sailor. His name was John Newton. He'd been at sea since he left home with his father, who was a merchant, when he was 11 years old. That's how long he had been a sailor. And never before had he been in this kind of predicament. He was seeing death coming close by. And during that time, he got to thinking, as I suppose one does when facing death, of his childhood. In his mind, he could hear his mother singing. He could hear her reading Bible stories to him. He could feel the warmth of home, although he was drenched and cold and working furiously. Now, his life as a sailor, as I said, he'd been on ships since he was 11, and in that time he had coarsened a bit. His mother's songs, his mother's Bible verses, his mother's prayers were all behind him. He was a sailor, and you know what that means. He'd been everywhere. And he had sailed with his father, the merchant, and then one drunken night, he was pressed into service in the British Navy, also known as being kidnapped. And so he was on the naval ship for a couple of years, and he did nothing but cause trouble. Finally, his captain traded him away to a slave ship to work on a slave ship, a trader ship that transported human cargo to the New World and then brought back sugar and rum and coffee and cotton. And as John Newton bailed out the bottom of that ship, he could hear the clank, clank, clanking of the chains, which for this time did not have their human cargo. The 600 people, men, women, and children, who had been chained in the bottom of the ship, had been delivered to Jamaica, and now they were headed home. But it didn't look like they were going to make it. This was the worst storm he'd ever seen. The wind blew and the waves crashed, and the upper mast broke off and fell into the sea. He was sure that death was coming. And as he bailed, and as he thought of his mother, soon he found himself doing something he hadn't done in a long time. He was praying. If only I get out of this, and only I live. He did get out of it. Soon the wrecked ship limped into the harbor in Ireland, vastly off course. As he stepped onto the dry ground, John Newton felt that his life might take a different direction. He still worked on slave trips, and he got to noticing that the 600 or so men, women, and children on these ships, they weren't given room to move. They couldn't even stand up. The crew would trot everybody out and make them dance a jig and laugh at them, give them food, and then beat them if they weren't cooperative. And John Newton had taken part in this as well. Eventually, John Newton was given his own slave ship to captain. But because he'd had this bit of an epiphany, he did not pack so many people into the area, and he gave them room to move, and he was very pleased. He was very proud, because on other ships, many of the slaves died. But on his ship, always, he delivered the goods 100%. And then he got to thinking some more about it, and as he looked at his cargo, he started to see real people. They were suffering, no matter how supposedly kind he'd been to them. He was taking them away from home. He was taking them to a place where they would be left away from their home. "Turn the ship around," he yelled to his amazed crew. "We're going back to Africa." And they did. They turned the ship around, and they took their cargo back to Africa and set them free. John Newton was no longer in the slave trade. Now, John Newton, in fact, became an abolitionist. He wrote pamphlets decrying the state of the slave trade. And eventually, he became a minister. And during this ministry, he thought about what he had done, the wretchedness, the wickedness of what he had done. And he felt a certain grace descend upon him. And this grace planted a seed. So in 1764, he was ordained, and he did write something that you all may know. Now, for those of you who don't know, this is a hymnal. And how does it tie in with Jimmy Carter and my inspiration? Well, a very beautiful lady stood up with a full orchestra, and she sang this song that, if you know it, you can join in. My very old voice will sing it with you. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. was blind, but now I see. That wretch was John Newton. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Farida Pawan. I'm going to tell you a story called Sangkanchil and Buaya, translated into English, The Mouse Deer and the Crocodile. It takes place in the Malaysian rainy season. Malaysia is the country I'm from. And in Malaysia, the rainy season is the winter, and thus Wintertelling today, the story. So in Malaysia, Buaya, the crocodile, is king of the river creatures. It can grow up to 18 feet or more and can burst up to speeds of 10 miles per hour or more. He is feared by many creatures, most of all, Sangkanchil, the mouse deer, because the mouse deer is the crocodile's favorite food. Now, the mouse deer, Sangkanchil, is the smallest hoofed animal in the world. It is the size of a small rabbit or a small dog, a chihuahua, but to many Malaysians, myself included, the mouse deer is considered the most cunning and cleverest of all creatures in the forest. The story I'm about to tell you today is the story as to when the mouse deer and the crocodile meet. Let's see what happens. So Sangkanchil, the mouse deer, one day was walking up and down her side of the river. She was very hungry, but all she could find were wet, soggy leaves. She walked up and down the river multiple times, but there was nothing else that she could find. But when she looked across the river, she saw rows and rows and rows of fruit trees, and hanging from those trees were red, luscious rambutans, brilliantly green guavas, luminescent yellow jackfruit, luscious purple mangosteens. She was so hungry. She wanted to eat them all, but she had a problem. She could not cross the river. She looked for a bridge, and there was none. And she looked for a sampan, a little boat, and there was not one floating either. And she looked for tall trees with branches, but all were too short. And she was almost giving up on the idea of crossing the river when at the corner of her eyes, she saw the crocodile, Buaya, gliding by. And she had an idea. She called out to the crocodile, Buaya, honorable sir, so good to see you, how wonderful. But you are alone. You're by yourself. You must be sad, and you must be so lonely. Lonely? Me? Don't you know, little foolish animal, that crocodiles are everywhere in this river? We rule this place. We rule this river. But why? I only see you. I see no one else. Are you sure? That made the crocodile even angrier. Just you wait, little foolish animal. I will call all of my friends and all of my family members to the surface, and you will see how many there are of us here and how mighty we are together. And so the crocodile called all of his friends and all of his family members to the surface. And it was quite a sight, quite a frightening sight. But the mouse deer had a plan. She, pretending to be puzzled, and she said to the crocodile boy, "Oh, your friends are everywhere. Your family members are everywhere. Can you have them? Why don't you have them line up one by one in a single row next to each other, so that I could count them one by one and be truly impressed? Line up, everyone. Let's show this foolish animal how many there are of us here together." And so all the crocodiles lined up one by one next to each other. And the mouse deer gingerly jumped on their hard heads and started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4. And when she got all the way to the 87th crocodile, she was clear across the river, and she bounded off toward the fruit trees. And when she got to a safe place, she waved to all the crocodiles. "I'm so glad there's so many of you here. I'm so thankful." And so only did the crocodiles at that point realized that they've been tricked. They thrashed loudly and wildly, but it was too late because the mouse deer had escaped one more time. Terima kasih, and thank you.
My name is Ken Ogus, and I'm a storyteller from Indianapolis. I do podcasting and creative writing. I have flyers out in the hallway if you want to use the QR code and see my work online. So this story was created with Dean Cameron Farrington. We've been working together for almost 5 years. Dean will be 5 in June. He's my grandson. There was once an extremely greedy man who had spent most of his life making money, and he was convinced that money could buy happiness. He was sure of it. But when he looked around and saw ordinary people who didn't make that much money, he noticed that they were very happy, just enjoying the colors of the world. They loved the blue skies, the green grass, the many colors of flowers and minerals, and the sunrises and sunsets.
Well, that doesn't quite seem fair. They haven't got much money, so I should take all those colors for myself, he said.
Well, he went around asking, how much it would cost, and nobody could tell him how much it would cost to buy all the colors in the world. So he went to a wizard. That's always a good idea, isn't it? Well, on the edge of town, he went to see the wizard, and he said,
"Well, I'd like to buy all the colors of the world, but no one knows where I would do that."
Well, sir, your lordship, you cannot buy all the colors of the world, but you could steal them.
Oh, no, I'm no stranger to stealing.
I didn't think so. Okay, so this is what we'll do. I will make you an exquisite trap.
A trap? Or what do you mean?
Well, I'll make a bag, and when you put the colors in the bag, they'll have to stay in there. They won't be able to get out unless you let them out.
Oh, no, once I have. Oh, how much is this going to cost me?
Everything. All of your gold and silver. You can do that, can't you? And
Well, of course I can do anything I want.
so he sent cartload after cartload of gold and silver to the wizard, and the wizard built a special kiln. He melted down the metals. He made a thread and added some special ingredients. And with that thread, he was able to weave a fabric and then sew a bag about as big as the greedy man he was himself, with pull strings at the top for fashion. And he said, "It's done. Now you can go get all the colors of the world, sir."
Well, you just, grab them and put them in the...
Yes, go try it. So he went out into his huge yard outside his castle, the home, and
just grab the blue of the sky and stick it in there. Oh, my.
the sky turned light gray, no color. He grabbed the green from the grass and
Stuffed it in the bag.
and the grass went to gray. And one by one, he took all the colors of the world, stuck them in that bag, pulled the strings tight. The entire world was colorless. And people were shocked. They were saddened. They said, "What's happened to all the beautiful colors?" And they began to cry. And the colors inside that bag heard them. And they began to cry too.
And why the greedy man says, "Oh, that racket, but look at those colors inside the bag. This is wonderful. They're all mine. You belong to me."
Well, the people of the world cried, and the colors cried. Even the air began to weep in the form of rain, and puddles formed, and floods began to fill the land. And oh my, the greedy man walked up and down the hallways of his castle of a home. He couldn't get to sleep. And he passed by a huge mirror. And when he looked at the mirror, he too was colorless.
Gray, and I look old, and I look greedy. This is not what I wanted. I wanted to be happy.
He knew what he had to do. He went outside into the yard. He opened up that bag and pulled the colors out. They went into the night's air and went back to where they were supposed to be. And the sun began to rise. The raining stopped, and a rainbow formed across the sky, and everybody looked up and said, "They're back, our colors." And the greedy man looked at the sky and said,
You used to belong to me.
and so he looked at his bag. He opened it up as wide as he could. He climbed inside, took one last look, and pulled the strings. And that morning, there was a sunset more beautiful than anybody had ever seen before.
Hello, my name is Dakota Medley, and today what I'm going to be telling is a story that I created called The Tale of the Polar Bear and the Arctic Fox. That is an original folk tale that I made up, meant to sound like a classic folk tale from back then. Once in a frozen Iceland, there was a mighty polar bear. The polar bear was marveled at by many of the animals, primarily three: the beluga whale, who was his biggest fan, the narwhal with the long tusk, and the old penguin, who traveled up from the South Pole to the North Pole just to marvel at the polar bear. But there was another animal in the frozen Iceland, the Arctic fox, and he was jealous of the polar bear. Why should that polar bear get so much respect, but not me? I am more cunning. I should be the mightiest creature in all the frozen Iceland, not him. Then one day, the Arctic fox got an idea. I know, he said. I'll challenge the polar bear. I'll prove to all those animals that I am the mightiest creature in all the frozen Iceland. So, he went to an area where the three animals were marveling at the polar bear, who was just walking. That was all he was doing. But they were still looking at him. And the Arctic fox, shaking his paw, said, Hey, polar bear, I challenge you. I want to prove that I'm the mightiest creature in all the frozen Iceland. Now, believe it or not, the polar bear was actually a kind and gentle creature and was not necessarily interested in proving himself. So the other animals got angry instead. How dare he, said the old penguin, shaking his cane. He should have to prove himself, said the narwhal. We should throw him in the frozen ocean, said the beluga whale. But out from all this commotion and the crowd came another animal, the wise caribou, who had an announcement himself to make. Now, said the wise caribou, perhaps we can handle this or settle this peacefully. Peacefully, said the old penguin, angrily. Yes, said the wise caribou, peacefully. I think that the polar bear and the Arctic fox should compete in 3 tests. A test of strength, endurance, and speed. The winner will be the mightiest creature in all the frozen Iceland. And so, the wise caribou set up the first test, the test of strength. He had the 2 competitors holding onto 2 ends of a rope to prepare to engage in a battle of tug of war, or game of tug of war. You think you're so strong, polar bear, said the Arctic fox, who was pulling with all his might and not budging. Meanwhile, the polar bear just stood there, not moving, for obvious reasons. Obviously, the Arctic fox was no match for the polar bear. The polar bear said, Now be careful, don't strain yourself. Obviously, the polar bear was a lot stronger than the Arctic fox, and after standing there for a minute, he yanked the rope and sent the Arctic fox flying several feet. Face planting in the snow. Obviously, the polar bear won that one. The wise caribou then set up the second challenge. He brought the 2 animals and the 3 that was watching to an icy river, where he told them, The 2 will have to cross from one side to the next. This is the test of endurance, a swimming test. The 2 hopped in the water. Obviously, the polar bear was a much better swimmer than the Arctic fox, and calmly swam his way through, humming. The Arctic fox, in the meanwhile, was the complete opposite. He was panicking. Help! 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 I can't swim! Eventually, the wise caribou grabbed him and pulled him out, or he drowned. So obviously the polar bear won that second competition, second test too. Next came the third test, the test of speed. And the test of speed was a bit different than the other two. The wise caribou told them, "You must run half a mile through the cold winds." "I'm not sure I can run that fast," said the polar bear. "I may be all soaking wet," the Arctic fox said, shaking it off, "but I know I can run fast, very fast." When the wise caribou yelled, "Go!" the two took off and fought through the cold winds. "Ooh, that wind is strong," said the polar bear. Come on," said the Arctic fox, who was also struggling. Eventually, the race was over. But the three other animals that were watching were furious. The Arctic fox had beaten the polar bear at the test of speed. "No!" "What?" said the beluga whale. "No," said the narwhal. "Impossible!" said the old penguin, shaking his cane. They wanted it to attack the Arctic fox angrily because, they were marveling at the mighty polar bear. "We should throw him in the frozen ocean," the beluga whale said again. "Let me poke him with my tusk," said the narwhal. "Some lady penguin lay an egg on him," said the old penguin. Bit of a strange threat, But then, as they all were charging toward the Arctic fox, the polar bear stopped them by putting his paw in the air and simply saying, "No." That was it. The Arctic fox was puzzled. He thought perhaps the polar bear was wanting to attack him himself. Obviously, the polar bear could just end him right there, if he wanted to. But remember, the polar bear was a kind and gentle creature. And to the surprise of the Arctic fox, he simply said, "You do not need to be jealous, as we all have our own unique abilities, gifts, and talents. I am stronger and a better swimmer. You, on the other hand, are a faster runner, and you can also change your fur color depending on what time of year it is." The Arctic fox had never thought of it that way. I guess I am a pretty fast runner, and my camouflage ability has come in handy throughout the years. Maybe I'm not the mightiest creature in the frozen Iceland." But then the polar bear said, "We are all unique creatures in our own way. You and I are not the only ones. The wise caribou has hooves that can allow him to stand on the snow without sinking. The beluga whale can swim backwards in the water. The narwhal, although this is rather obvious, has that very long tooth called a tusk. And the old penguin can camouflage and hide himself from predators both above in the air and below in the ocean due to his black and white pattern on his body. The other animals looked at themselves in amazement and were rather impressed at just how unique they really were. And as you could tell, the Arctic fox, by that point, or at least a bit later, along with the other animals, had learned their lesson, a lesson which we can all learn. To not be jealous of other people's abilities, as we all have our own unique gifts and talents. If you are jealous of someone else for some reason, remember there might be some attribute, gift, talent, or ability about yourself that would make you stand out from everyone else. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Jonathan, and I will be retelling a story from a collection of monster stories by Beatrice Philpotts. And the story is called The Ogre's Hat. Now, there once was an ogre named Grindel who lived all alone in a mansion on the edge of town. Now, Grindel had a terrible, terrible reputation, which he richly deserved because he was as nasty as he possibly could be. And so nobody ever came to visit him, and he spent his days alone. One day, while Grindel was out in the woods looking for something to eat, he spied a young woman walking through the woods. Ho, 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 a morsel to keep the hunger pangs at bay. Grindel pounced on her, and then blinked in surprise, because in his hands he held not a young woman, but an old peddler. How? Gasped Grindel. Let me go and I'll explain, said the peddler. Reluctantly, Grindel released his grip. All right, you see, I have this magic hat. Every time I put this hat on my head, I change shape. You certainly wouldn't like the taste of me now, would you, since I'm a dry old man? Well, I mean, you're still meat to me. Wait! If you let me go, I will give you my magic hat. How's that sound? Grindel thought about it for a moment. Could be rather useful to walk around in a disguise. I'll take it. And he snatched the hat from the peddler. Grindel looked at that hat. It looked like a completely ordinary hat. In fact, it looked so ordinary, Grindel was about to protest that the peddler had tricked him when he realized the peddler had vanished. And so, Grindel took that hat and he went home. And when he got home and had the door safely locked behind him, he couldn't resist the urge to try it on. So he went over to his mirror. A rather odd bit of furniture for an ogre, a mirror, don't you think? But he went over to that mirror, and he closed his eyes, and he laid that hat onto his tangled, dirty hair. And when he opened his eyes, he got the shock of his life. In the mirror, he did not see an old ogre with a plain hat, but a prince wearing fine clothes with a gold crown on his head. Is that really me? Grindel felt the fine velvet cloak that he was wearing. Oh, and the lace collar. He stood admiring his reflection in the mirror, practiced smiling. Ooh, it was something he wasn't at all used to, but he gave it a shot. He was so entranced by his reflection until a little slip of paper over on the mantel caught his eye. That was an invitation card that he had stolen from a duke just a few days ago. Well, I think I might just go to the king's ball tonight instead. And so Grindel went off to the palace. And what a party it was! Grindel was determined to behave himself, and everyone was very eager to meet this handsome new prince. All night long, Grindel danced and chatted and drank, and then at midnight, a grand feast was served. Grindel was seated next to a lovely princess, whom he had just reduced to helpless mirth with witty stories, when a vast roasted goose was served. Completely forgetting himself, Grindel let out a roar and leapt on the table. He grabbed the fowl and he tore it limb from limb, biting off big pieces and throwing the bones over his shoulders. As the other guests looked on, quite thoroughly horrified. "Arrest that man," said the king. 2 guards came forward to grab Grindel, but he punched them both flat and ran toward the door. "After him!" But it was too late. Grindel was out into the night before anyone could stop him. Now, the next morning, when Grindel awoke, he remembered with horror what had happened the night before. He wanted to go back to bed and forget it had all happened, but that shiny gold crown over on the table caught his eye. All right, I will try it again. but I'll be a proper prince this time. And so Grindel picked up the crown and he set it on his head. But in the mirror, he did not see a prince, but rather a long white apron tied around his waist and a tall white chef's hat on his head. Huh. Well, I suppose it's about time I had a decent job. And so Grindel went into town and got a job at the bakery that very morning. All day long, Grindel mixed up the pastry, he rolled out the dough, he washed and wiped. The chief baker was very impressed and was about to say so when disaster struck again. All right, Grindel, it is time to make the sausage rolls. Go and fetch the sausage meat. And so Grindel went and he got down the vat of raw pink sausage meat. Now, by the time that the chief baker turned around, he found Grindel with his head in the sausage meat. He had stuffed all of that raw, pink, sticky meat into his mouth and was now licking the bowl clean. Sacre bleu! And Grindel knew it was time to go, and he was out the door before the baker could say another word. Now, the next morning, when Grindel awoke, he remembered with horror what had happened the day before. He stood next to that chef's hat, eyeing it much more cautiously this time. Okay, let's see what happens next. So Grindel picked up that hat, closed his eyes, placed it onto his head, and he saw that he was now a wizard with a tall, pointed hat, a long, flowing beard, and a cape spangled with stars. Oh, what fun it will be to be a wizard, casting spells. I've always wanted to know magic. And so Grindel pranced around his house, waving a wand in the air and muttering nonsense words. In no time, he made a little cart with a sign that said, "Wizard Spells and Charms," and was about to cart it into town to sell his wares when he heard a knock at the door. Oh, I wonder who that could be. Perhaps my first customer as a wizard. And so Grindel threw his door wide open. And who should be on his stoop but the very peddler whose hat Grindel had taken? Grindel tried to slam the door shut, but the peddler pushed his way in. Now I hear about the antics that you have been playing with my hat, and I've come to take it back. And you had better apologize for what you've done, or else I will tell the king who ruined his feast. And so Grindel apologized and gave the hat back and told the peddler how very sorry he was for the mayhem he had caused. And then Grindel told the peddler about how lonely he had been before he had that magic hat, all by himself with no one ever visiting. Now the peddler was really a kindly soul and took pity on Grindel, and so he said, "You know what, Grindel? I have a different hat for you, and with this hat, you will never be unhappy again." And so the peddler reached into his bag and pulled out a battered old straw hat that he handed to Grindel and then disappeared. Amused, Grindel took the hat and he went over to his mirror and he closed his eyes, put it on his head, and well, he looked the same as ever. But he felt completely different. He felt that he wanted to make music, and so he went and found an old tin whistle and began to play. And he danced and played and was so happy that he danced right into town. And when he got to the market square, he set that hat down on the cobblestones for people's coins and danced and played all day long. And you know what? Grindel was never unhappy again.
Hello, my name's Clayton Schroeder, and the title of this story and this song is Three Women, and it's about the choices, decisions, and actions of these women. And I gotta warn you, it's a little heavy because it's also about the consequences. The first woman was a girl that I used to work with at Longhorn Steakhouse when I first moved to Bloomington. I realized I said girl, but this was 20 years ago, and we were all younger then. Her name was Shauna. She was a bartender. She had crazy blonde hair, a laugh that could fill a room, and a bit of a wild streak. She had moved from California with her daughter to get her life straightened out. And with the help and support of her family and friends, she did. But she left her son back in California. So she gathered her strength, said her goodbyes, and went back to California. About a week later, she called me up. She said, "Clayton, I don't know what I'm doing out here. I feel so lost. All my friends are back in Indiana. I just don't know what I'm doing." And I said, "Shauna, you know exactly what you're doing. You're getting your family back together." There was a girl that I worked with. She had a few drinks throughout her shift. Blonde hair as wild as her laugh. She journeyed half across the country, drawing strength from friends and family. Now, woman, don't lose your way. Oh, woman, know what you're doing. You are strong and are loved and have chosen to go to Cali and make your family one. Oh, Shauna, don't you wanna make things better for your son and daughter? Find endless strength in family in me. The second woman I met at TGI Fridays when it used to be attached to the mall. I used to go there after my lunch shifts at Longhorn because it was happy hour, which meant $5 Long Island iced teas, which meant I spent many happy hours at TGI Fridays. And one day, there was a woman sitting at the bar. Her name was Andrea. She had the words risk and hope tattooed across her knuckles. And she was drinking a shot of Jack Daniels with a sprinkle of black pepper, a dash of bitters, and a pinch of loose tobacco. Pretty sure she was destined to be written into a song. But we got talking. Actually, she got talking. She talked a lot. She said, all the men in her life were mashuganas. She said, I'm surrounded by mashuganas, which is Yiddish for idiots. And she said, Clayton, I'm really tired. I can't go home. I could really use a nap. And I said, you need a nap? I got a bed. So we went back to my place, shared the last beer that was in my fridge. She smoked most of my cigarettes, even though she swore she was quitting. She laid down for her nap. And when she woke up, I made her a sandwich, and she went on her way. A woman familiar with risk and hope, drinking Jack Bitter's pepper and tobacco. She says I can never go home. She likes tests, I call them traps. She swears she's quitting and smokes half your pack. All she needs is a safe rest. Oh, woman, watch what you're doing, playing round with no good Meshuggahs. Take a deep breath with me, Andrea. Share a beer and a sandwich after a nap in my bed. Rest your head. This day is complete. Rest your head and sleep. The third woman, this is where it gets a little heavy. It's those consequences. So I never saw Andrea after that day. I hope she's doing well. Shauna and I are still friends, and I'm happy to say that she and her 2 kids are doing just fine. Although after 20 years, they aren't exactly kids anymore. But the third woman, there was a... I'm going to start that one more time. A woman I do not know, only flashes from time long ago. Those scars are deep, deep in me. But through the heartache, all the memories of pain, I battle through it, and one truth remains. Just let it be. Just let it be. Oh, woman, what are you doing? Kicking your son until he's black and blue. Oh, Lisa, you'll never see the man this boy has grown up to be. Just let it be. Just let it be. Thank you for listening.
Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good night. My name is Kellen Everett. I'm going to be telling a story that I found in a collection of Russian folk tales. Let me just adjust the height here real quick. And this collection of folk tales is more or less the Russian answer to Grimm's fairy tales, but being Russian, much colder, appropriate for wintertelling. In fact, this story is about what a group of animals, how they spend the winter. And it starts with an ox walking down a lonely forest road in the chill of early winter. Now, even though it was still early winter, the winter before this one had been one of the coldest that anybody could remember. And this year was shaping up to be much the same way. And so this ox was very concerned with how he was going to stay warm through the winter. And as he's traveling along the road, he comes across a ram. And he says, "Ram, where are you going?" And the ram says, "I'm looking to stay warm through the winter." "Well, so am I," says the ox. "Come with me." And so off they went together, the ox and the ram. And as they go off together, they then come across a pig. And they say, "Pig, where are you going?" "I'm looking for somewhere to stay warm through the winter," says the pig. "Well, so are we," says the ox. "Come with us." And so off they go. Now this group is traveling along, and as they travel along, they come across a goose and a rooster. "Goose, rooster, where are you going?" asks the ox. "We're looking for somewhere to stay warm through the winter," says the goose. "Yeah, and I'm going with the goose," says the rooster. "Well, come with us." And so off they go, traveling along the road. And as they're traveling, they're becoming good traveling companions. They're laughing and they're joking. But the whole time, in this chilly early winter, they're realizing and thinking, how are they going to stay warm? Things are only going to get worse. And the ox has an idea. He says, "I know. We'll build a big cabin, spacious enough to fit us all, and we'll put in a lot of work, but it'll be quite nice, a good way to spend the winter." And the ram thinks and says, "Well, I don't know that we need to build a cabin. I have a nice wool coat that will keep me warm. That's how I will spend the winter." And the pig thinks and, "Yeah, and I have sharp tusks, and I'll dig down deep and dig a burrow under where the frost can reach, and that's how I'll spend the winter." And then the goose chimes in, "Well, I have 2 nice fluffy wings, and one will go over me and one will go under me as I hunker down, and that's how I'll spend the winter." And the rooster says, "I got 2 wings too. I'll do what the goose is doing." And so the ox is disappointed that nobody's on board with his cabin plan, but he can't force anybody to do what they won't do. Everyone has to do things in their own way. And so he goes off to build a cabin. And as he builds it, the winter goes on and the nights grow longer and the winds begin to blow harder and the snow begins to pile up in big drifts. But the ox finishes his cabin just in time for one of the fiercest blizzards of the winter. And he's hunkered down nice and safe in his cabin when there's a knock at the cabin door. And the ox opens it up, and he sees outside is his friend the ram, shivering. "Ox, it's too cold. You gotta let me inside." "No, you have a nice wool coat. That's how you were supposed to spend the winter." "Oh, ox, I can't take it. If you don't let me in, I'm gonna ram down the walls of your cabin. We'll see how warm it is then." So the ox lets in the ram. And just as they're getting settled and getting warmed back up, there's another knock at the door. And they open it up, and it's their other friend, the pig. "Pig, what are you doing here? You were supposed to use your tusks to dig a deep burrow. That's how you were going to spend the winter." "I tried that. It was too cold. You gotta let me in, ox." "No." "If you don't let me in, I'll dig a burrow under the walls of your cabin and knock them down. We'll see how warm it is then." Okay, well, the ox lets the pig in. And as they're settling in, there's another knock at the door. They open it up, and standing outside, shivering, are the goose and the rooster huddled together. "Goose, rooster, you both have wings. One goes over you, one goes under you. That's how you stay warm in the winter." "Oh, if you don't let us in, ox, I'm going to flap up onto the roof of your cabin and knock down all the shingles." And the rooster says, "Yeah, and I'll pick out all the moss from between the logs. I'll have a wind blow through. We'll see how warm it is then." Okay, well, the ox lets in the goose and the rooster. And, threats notwithstanding, once they're all together It's very cramped and very snug. That's a lot of animals for a not very large cabin, but, you know, they get to chatting and hanging out, and it's like their days on the road. They were having a good time. They were laughing and joking, and, you know, the rooster even went up and into the rafters and started crowing and singing happy songs as the blizzard outside raged on with the winds howling and the snow blowing and piling up. And outside in this blizzard, there was another animal. There was a fox who was very cold and very hungry. And he heard this cabin off in the distance, and he heard the rooster's happy songs, and he thought that it sounded like a nice, happy dinner. But how was he going to get that rooster with all those other animals there? So, being a clever fox, he hatched an idea. He went to his friends, the bear and the wolf, and he said, "Bear, wolf, there is a winter feast for us at that cabin up the road. Why, it's got an ox for the bear, it's got a ram for the wolf, it's got a rooster for me, and there's more besides that. All we have to do is go to the cabin and take it." "Well, thank you, Mr. Fox," said the wolf and the bear. "Of course we'll go with you." And as they go off through the blizzard, digging their way through the snow, piling up, they see the cabin off in the distance, and as they get closer, they realize it's a smaller cabin than they thought. They aren't going to be able to go in all at once. The door is very narrow, so they'll have to take turns. And the bear and the wolf say, "Well, Fox, since this was your idea, why don't you take the honor of going first?" "All right," says the fox. And so he goes up to the cabin door, and he opens it up and lets himself inside. And as the fox enters into the cabin, the other animals see him, and, well, the ox pins him to the wall with his horns as the ram sits down on him, and the pig uses his tusks and starts tearing him up as the goose flaps down and pecks him to pieces. All the while, the rooster is up in the rafters crowing, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, come on in, won't you?" Well, they made quick work of that fox. But outside in the blizzard, the wind was still howling, and the bear and the wolf were patiently waiting their turns, but less patiently by the minute with the blizzard howling. "I can't take this cold anymore," says the wolf. "I'm going to go in and see what's taking the fox so long." So he goes up to the cabin door, and he opens it up, and he lets himself in. The other animals see a wolf, and the ox pins him to the wall with his horns, and the ram sits down on him while the pig tears him up with his tusks as the goose flaps down and pecks him to pieces. All the while, the rooster is up there in the rafters crowing, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, you come in too." But outside, in the blizzard, the bear was very patient. He couldn't hear any of this. He just thought that they were up there having a good time with their winter feast. And he thought, "I'm so cold and so hungry, I can't wait anymore." So he goes up to the cabin and he opens up the door, and the bear lets himself in. You know what comes next. Right as all the other animals charge, though, the bear realizes what's happening, and he uses his great bear strength to wrestle his way out from underneath this pile of animals. And he takes one look at what's going on, and he turns around and books it off into the woods, never once looking back. But with all the fierce predators gone and taken care of, and their nice, snug cabin, all the animals were safe and sheltered and warm through the winter. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. We have had some stories, haven't we? Had some true ones, had some made up ones, had some fantastical ones, had some sad ones, all kinds of stories. What I've got for you is a bit of gossip. Well, that's like a story, right? This is about them step-husbands. You know about step-husbands, right? They're the ones that step in when the regular husband steps out. I knew you knew about them. Yes. Well, back up in the holler, there was a woman, no better than she should be, but she had herself a man, and they were a sorry couple. And come one day, he says, "I'm going to go out for a bit." He said, "I'll probably be gone 2 or 3 days." You'll just see me when you see me, he says, and off he goes. Now, he was no sooner gone, and it was evening, than there came a knock at the door. She thought, he's back awful soon. She lifted the latch, opened the door, and it wasn't her husband. You didn't think it was going to be her husband, did you? It was one of them step-husbands. He said, I heard your husband was gone. Thought you might want company. Yes, she did. She did want company, and she let him in. And, well, you know, they got to fooling around. And this and that and the other thing. And they heard someone walking across the porch. Oh, law, she said. Oh, law, my man's back early. And that step-husband said, well, you got to hide me. Hide me quick. And so she made him run up the steps to the loft, and there in the loft there was one of those old big blanket chests. And he rolled in, and she mashed down the lid and latched it. Went traipsing back down the stairs, lifted the latch, opened the door. And it wasn't her husband. You didn't think it was going to be her husband, did you? No, it was what you might say it was step-husband number 2. He'd heard her man was away and thought she might like some company. Well, this one was a little younger and a little stouter than the one upstairs, and so, well, she let him in. And they got to fooling around and whatnot, and that man up there in that chest, he was most suffocated with quilts, but he laid real still, didn't make any noise. He didn't know no better. He thought it was her husband come home. And as for that woman, I believe she completely forgot about him. Well, they were they were having a good time. And there was a window there by the bed, and there come a tapping at the window. Now, who could that be? So she opened the window a little crack, called out, "Somebody out there?" You know she couldn't see nothing because it was thick dark that night. You couldn't see the shape of anything outside, couldn't see anything inside either, but that didn't matter. But outside, so she isn't sure what's tapped on the window, and she says, "Anybody out there?" It was step-husband number 3. "Oh, honey," he says, "it's your neighbor come visiting." Oh, no, she thought. And she didn't care for him. Why, he was so old. He was way past 40. She knew it. And what's more, he was ugly. He had hairs growing out of his nose. So she said, "Well, you better go away because my husband's coming home pretty soon and I don't want him to find you here." But the neighbor said, "Oh, but I want to come in just for a minute." "No," she said, "no way." And he kept saying that he wanted in, and she kept saying no. And finally, he said, "Well, why don't you just stick your face out and let me give you a big old kiss?" Before she could say something, that feller in bed with her, remember step-husband number 2? Well, he started poking her like he wanted to say something. So she called out the window, "Just wait a minute," shut the window real tight, and he came over and whispered in her ear, We're going to have some fun with this one. And so he kind of eased over to the window. He backed up to the window. Mhm. He lifted his shirt tail, and he kind of put his anatomy on the windowsill. And she opened the window, and she called out, "Okay, you can kiss me now." And that fool outside, well, he couldn't see anything. He put his hand out, he felt that smooth cheek. And he puckered up, and he planted a great big smackaroo, you know where. And as soon as he did, the feller inside jumped off the sill, the woman slammed the window down, and that neighbor went away, and he was hopping mad. He was spitting, he was gagging, and he was furious. Went back to his house. He was a neighbor, 'twasn't far. He hunted him up, the biggest old iron kettle he could find. He filled it full of water. He put it in the fire. He got that water boiling. He got it so hot the kettle was glowing. And he wrapped it in an old blanket, made his way back to that house, and he tapped on the window. "Is he back?" She opened the window a little bit. "What do you want now?" "Oh, honey, I want me another kiss." He does? He didn't know? Oh, well, that step-husband number 2, he was right tickled at the thought of putting one over on this fella again. And so, same thing. He got edged over by the window. He got up on the windowsill. She opened the window and said, "All right, honey, you can kiss me now." And the guy outside picked up that boiling water, and he went swoosh. There was a shriek. I can't even begin to tell you how loud that shriek was. Imagine that boiling water hitting those tender parts. You got to feel a little sympathetic. Anyway, he was staggering around. He was crying out, "I'm on fire, a fire!" And he was knocking over the tables. He was knocking over the chairs. And upstairs in the chest, that feller thought the house was on fire. He begins to holler, "Pack down the big chest. Somebody come up and get the big chest. Come on, take the big chest." And the fella downstairs, he thought it was a haunt. He burst out the door. He went running down the road, screeching and screaming, with his shirt tails flapping and his behind smoking and his pants forgotten. You could hear him as he disappeared over the hill. Now that neighbor fella, step-husband number 3, he just went on about his business feeling righteous. And that woman, well, she went back up the steps to the loft and opened up the chest, and there was that feller, step-husband number 1, you remember him. And she told him what and all had happened. He took to laughing. He took to laughing like he would never stop laughing, and they sat down together on that floor of that loft, and they laughed till they didn't have a laugh left. And then they went back downstairs and got to playing and one thing and another. And since that's where the story ends, why, you can just imagine them down there having a good time yet. Now, I have to tell you that that's a very old story, and that somehow, you can figure it out yourself, somehow it made its way from Chaucer's England clear across to the Tennessee, North Carolina mountains, where a collector, a folktale collector named Richard Chase, collected it. And I met Mr. Chase once. He was an old man by then, and he had a carved walking stick that was higher than he was, and he looked kind of like a wizard. And he said very crossly, he said, "If you tell my stories, you say my name. You tell them I collected those stories." And this one he put in a book called American Folk Tales and Songs. So, you know. Now, we are so glad you came this evening to hear stories. This is the first event of this year for the Storytellers Guild, but it isn't the last one. In fact, in just a week, on March 2nd, you can come to the library. If you have young children in your lives, you'll want to bring them, because this will be the site, this stage will be the site where we will bring Cornbread and Poppy from the books of Cornbread and Poppy by Matthew Cordell. We'll bring them to life with a little playlet. And we'd like to invite you to bring any young children that you have in your life with you. In fact, you might bring them to the Matthew Cordell exhibit, which is going on down the hall from here when the library's open. And I've left invitations to the exhibit out as you leave, so you can pick one up. And you can see all the activities that are going on. You can see that the artist himself will be here on March 8th. And we hope that you will come back to see the exhibit yourself. Beyond that, well, we'll be doing a workshop in case you'd like to learn how to tell stories or are interested in it. We'll be doing summer tales. We'll be doing the Festival of Ghost Stories that Patty mentioned. And we'll be doing lots of other storytelling events throughout the year, which we hope you will find fun and interesting. Thank you so much for coming. Hope to see you again soon.